You're listening to Tuesday Night AMP with Frank Vaughn and Sierra on the Angry Marks Podcast Network.
Tonight what we're going to do is we're going to do a retrospective on the effect that the whole Chris Benoit incident has had on the business from then until now. We will talk a little bit about what went down, the circumstances of what happened and sort of the results that have come from that. But I want to make it perfectly clear to our listeners up front that we are here to neither worship nor bury Chris Benoit tonight. That's not what this is about. So please hang with us as we kind of work through sort of the thoughts and feelings that we had. We're monitoring the Angry Marks chat room tonight. I want to kind of get the feedback from the Marks in there as well about this subject. But the one thing that we can all agree on is that from that day forward, the business changed forever and irrevocably. The business today is a very different thing now because of that incident. By the way, I'm Frank Vaughn, joined as always by my co-host Sierra. And Sierra, go ahead and jump in here with me. Sort of give me the where you were when you first heard about this, when it went down.
It was kind of ironic about thinking about that day because I was telling King Jay the other night when we were discussing this whole incident. That day, it was so weird because, I was in high school. I was getting ready to go into, I believe, my senior year. I was at home during the summer. I was sitting around playing SmackDown versus Raw. And I was doing the Road to WrestleMania thing, and something just kept saying, pick Chris Benoit. So I picked him and went through the whole thing the whole day. Later on that night, I turned on Raw, and that's when Vince McMahon appeared. Because at this time, I did not have internet, so I didn't know. He appeared and made that statement, and I'm like, what? Huh? Wait a minute, no, this can't be. And then, I still had no clue what happened until the next night when I turned on, I hadn't turned on Nancy Grace and everything, and that's when it just got really just crazy. And I was just like, wow. I didn't really know what to think because I've been a fan of his since his early years in WCW. And just to here, not only is he no longer living, but what he apparently did, it was just mind-boggling because I'm like, no, you wouldn't think that would happen. But it did. And for years, I'm not the type of person where I just write him off because of what he did. I can't judge him for what he did. He's going to have to answer that himself. But it's kind of hard for me to this day to watch matches of his without thinking about that. And that's bad. I don't want to be thinking about what happened that day when I'm watching a match of his, but every time I see him or see his name mentioned, that's what immediately pops up in my mind. Not what all he's done in the business, what good he has done, but what he did bad.
Mm-hmm. I myself, I'm reading the Angry Marks chat room, and Angry Tensai said his birthday is June 25th. Mine happens to be June 24th. I just had a birthday on Sunday, and I had just come down off the high of having a really great birthday party and having a good time. I just turned 32, and it was an amazing time for me. And that Sunday night, I got a phone call. Was it Sunday night or the next day? I don't remember. Maybe it was the next day. I got a phone call from Killer Kev, actually. He was the one that broke the news to me that Benoit was dead. And you have to understand, it had been less than 2 years since we had said goodbye to Eddie Guerrero.
Yeah.
And I
remember that night, too.
And I remember thinking, Chris Benoit can't be dead. Now, I had heard the news reports that he had no-showed a house show on Saturday night that weekend, and he no-showed the pay-per-view the next day. I was very surprised by that because the one thing everybody's always said about Benoit is that he was the consummate professional. The guy was never late, let alone no-showed an event. He was not one of these rock star guys that, played bullshit politics in the back like your Kevin Nashes and your Scott Halls and your Hulk Hogan's. He wasn't that guy. He was a company man. He was a franchise guy who was loyal to the bitter end. And when he went out there to the ring, I don't remember ever seeing a bad match with Chris Benoit. Ever.
No, I can't think of one.
That guy busted his ass in the ring every time he went out there. There was one thing that Chris Benoit took serious in life, and that was his role as a WWE superstar. I mean, he busted his ass, and he did everything he could to put that company over. He jobbed when he was told to job. He won when he was told to win. And no matter whether he was jobbing or winning, he made his opponent look like $50 million every time he was in the ring. So to get the news initially that he had no-showed a house show that Saturday, and then certainly to just no-show a pay-per-view like that the next night, was completely uncharacteristic. I remember thinking, something can't be right here. He must be sick, or God, please tell me he didn't overdose like Eddie did, or have a heart attack, or whatever it was happened to Eddie. I think it was a heart attack. Please tell me it wasn't something like that. Yeah. And I'm thinking, something's not right here, because this is not Chris Benoit. And sure enough, it turned out he was dead. And, Vince McMahon went on Raw the next night and gave the soundbite that we just heard. And in fact, what I thought was a truly classy move at the time, it was an empty arena. They canceled the show, sent everybody home, and did an empty arena show where all they did was just tribute videos to Chris Benoit. And they showed highlights from his career. And at that time, all the information any of us had was simply that he was dead.
Yeah.
And that his wife was dead, and that his son was dead. We had absolutely no idea what the circumstances of that were. In fact, I think it was sometime toward the end of Raw that Monday night that the police reports started coming out that they suspected him of killing his family and then himself.
Well, see, when I found out what exactly happened, I didn't find out till maybe late that Tuesday night after ECW, because I didn't have the internet or anything to know what was going on. So when I turned on the news, that's when I seen the headline of murder-suicide. And the craziest thing was, I remember my mom, she asked me, because she seen it on the news, she was like, well, what happened? And I'm like, I don't know. I said, I just hope it's nothing crazy like some murder-suicide. And 30 minutes later, here comes the fucking headline. And it just made me feel like, what? I couldn't even fathom any of that, because it was so hard to associate Chris Benoit, this great in-ring technician, great wrestler, doing something like that. But a lot of people don't realize, yeah, they might be great people on TV and getting there on time and doing what they're supposed to, but we don't know what's going on at home. Mm-hmm. And it just seems like, because I watched the news coverage of it all of that fucking week. I watched the freaking media tear the business into pieces. And then, it was bad enough the media was doing it. Then you have professional wrestlers going on this fucking media coverage, tearing it apart their damn selves. And then not only tearing the business apart, but tearing him apart as a wrestler. Yeah, what he did is horrible, but Jesus Christ. Some of the comments some of them made was just inappropriate. And it was just like, he does have a family grieving. They don't need to hear this right now.
Well, he has other children that had to live with the consequences of that.
Yeah.
And the best job that I saw by anybody of making that a point worth listening to was Chris Jericho.
Yeah.
In his second book, he talks about going through the whole process of dealing with the Benoit tragedy and how he spent some time with Benoit's other son, the one that lived with his mother elsewhere in Canada, I think. Mm-hmm. And he goes through the whole thing, and his son was just completely lost, did not know how to process the thing, didn't know what to say about it, didn't know my dad. We go from my dad being a hero of the business, being one of the top stars in the business, and certainly one of the best technical workers ever to lace up a pair of boots, to this. And what does a kid do with that, And I still have a hard time dealing with this. You talked about how it's hard for you to watch Chris Benoit matches now. 5 years later, I still can't.
Well, I mean...
I haven't seen a single Chris Benoit match or anything about Chris Benoit in the ring since the night of that tribute show, where I, like everybody else, thought, "Oh my God, we lost another one. Let's pay on, let's honor him with this show." But by the end of the show, the circumstances had come out, and I was like, and my initial reaction was one of anger. I was all fuck Chris Benoit for the longest time. and I'm still having a hard time celebrating anything about it. I understand what you're saying about how let's separate the man from the wrestler and all that. We've had 5 years to sort through all that business, okay?
Yeah.
And for 5 years now, I've heard people argue both sides of this issue. But for me, I'm still firmly in the middle. I'm still on the fence and don't know what to do with this even 5 years later, because part of me says clearly he wasn't in his right mind when he did this. You know, something was wrong. And somebody in the chat room just now, it may have even been Stevie J, talked about some of the texts that he sent out through that weekend that were just complete nonsense gibberish. You know, and clearly he was not in his right mind when he did the thing. But at the same time, I'm a father for 2 small children, okay?
Yeah.
And for me, it's hard to say, well, let's just excuse what he did because he wasn't in his right mind, or let's separate the wrestler from the man. I have a hard time doing that because I have 2 small children that I could not ever fathom bringing any harm to.
Well, see, I get what you're saying. I never been with the whole thing of, you know, because the person's not in their right mind, let's give them an excuse of why they did this. You know, I'm totally against that. I don't care what your problem is. There's no reason for you to do what you did. Mm-hmm. You was in the right mind to do it. So now that you did it and you got caught, don't use that as an excuse. Mm-hmm. But, you know, for the longest time, now I still have problems watching a match of his, but for the longest time, I just didn't want nothing to do with him. Mm-hmm. And, you know, one of my family members that got me a WWE calendar, and his picture was on it. I was like, I'm skipping that whole month. And, you know, I went through the same thing with Owen Hart when that whole accident happened, and Eddie Guerrero, you know, I went through the same thing, but Chris Benoit is like a whole other situation because no matter what it is, you always think about that. And it's so hard to separate him from the incident because it's there. It's not going away. It's not like something he got busted for drugs and he went to jail and did a couple of years and everybody moves on with their lives. No, this is something worse.
You know, he's not Scott Hall or the Hardy Boys.
And it was just like, when this whole situation happened, it was just like a domino effect. Everything just fell apart in the industry. You know, a week prior to this, Sherry Martel passed away. And the craziest thing is when, you know, I was going back and looking at research and stuff about Sherry Martel and stuff, they didn't even mention her death until a day after this Benoit situation went down. And when they mentioned her on the news that she died, the first thing they went to is that she was on drugs. Mm-hmm. It was more so the whole Benoit situation for the media was their chance to tear the industry apart and blame everything on steroids. Mm-hmm. Everybody that died that week, like, hold on, let's see. I got Sherry Martel, she died on June 15th. She had prescription medicines and oxycodone. And then John Cronus from ECW, he died July 18th, the next month. And then in August, Brian Adams of Chronic died on August 13th, 2007. Now, look at this. Even though those dates are months apart, the media still took that opportunity to rip the industry apart. Mind you, a lot of people don't realize I watched that whole coverage of the whole Benoit situation. They covered that thing for about 3 months. Mm-hmm. 3 months of them tearing the industry apart, saying they're on steroids, all of them on drugs, and then to make situations worse, you got freaking Mark Marrow, who I'm not really the biggest fan of either. He comes on there talking about some list he has of people under 40 that died.
Yeah. He was,
and that just made it worse because he wasn't saying anything positive. He was saying everything negative to help tear the industry down.
Not only that, but you know, some of the information he had was questionable anyway. I mean, he was sort of the Jose Canseco of pro wrestling. You know how Canseco came out with this long list of players that supposedly had used steroids, and Barry Bonds was on the list, and Roger Clemens was on the list, and Mark McGuire was on the list, and Sammy Sosa was on the list, and Rafael Palmeiro was on, you know. So he was sort of and that's one of the things that I wanted to get to tonight was, okay, so we've talked about exactly how we heard about the whole Benoit thing and talked through some of the feelings that we've had. A lot of what I wanted to focus on tonight's show with this retrospective is sort of the effect that it's had on the business since then. And at least in the short term, and Jericho covers this in his book also, one of the immediate effects that this whole thing had on the business was all of a sudden people started crawling out from under rocks to get a piece of the spotlight.
Oh God, don't even get me started on who.
It blew my mind because, and I'm going to make this point, and people can get pissed at me if they want, but due to what I do in my real job for a living, I think this is a valid point, okay? Mm-hmm. 2007, something else major was going on all through that year, particularly through the summer months. Mm-hmm. That is a troop surge in Iraq. We sent another 100,000 troops into Iraq in the summer of 2007 to try to get control of that situation. Okay? So here we are in June of 2007, and the media just completely fucking forgets about both of the wars that we're fighting and all the soldiers that are dying overseas. And they just swarmed in on this wrestling thing like 10 homeless guys on the last chicken bone.
Yeah.
I mean, it blew my mind that the wars overseas where people are dying by the dozens just completely dissipated in light of what was going on with Chris Benoit and the WWE. All of a sudden, the O'Reilly factor and Hannity and Combs and Katie Couric and Meredith Vieira, and we're going to hear a clip from that show in just a minute. All these different, Nancy Grace, all these different media outlets just completely dropped the wars that were going on, particularly the one that had just up and doubled in size that same month. Forgot all about all of that and all the dozens of soldiers dying overseas. And they swarmed in on this thing like the very fabric of our nation depended on it. Now, I want to say two things. Number one, yes, it was a tragedy that Chris Benoit killed his wife and his son and then himself. Okay? And as a wrestling fan, it was a tragedy what that did to the business. But folks, let's keep shit in perspective. This is fucking wrestling.
Yeah.
It's a pre-scripted, quasi-athletic thing. Okay? It's a TV show. For all intents and purposes, this would be like finding out that Snooki drowned her newborn baby or something. All right? God forbid that should ever happen. I'm not saying that, but to me it's just like, let's keep this shit in perspective. It blew my mind how big this thing got.
And,
it's so fucking big I couldn't even follow it anymore.
And now
because
to the murder-suicide involved.
All of a sudden, like you said, Mark, Miro comes crawling out from under a rock with this list of people who supposedly use steroids. All these different hangers-on and has-beens and never-wases that were even somehow loosely associated with the WWE at any point in their lives, all of a sudden were being treated like subject matter experts.
Yeah.
And Chris Jericho actually covered that. And in fact, Chris Jericho was on a long hiatus during this time.
Mm-hmm.
He left the WWE in 2005, and up to this point, hadn't really felt like coming back. He said two things happened in 2007 that made me know that it was time to come back to wrestling. Number one, the hour-long match between John Cena and Shawn Michaels on Raw. That was a fucking fantastic match. Got the juices flowing in me again. And then he said, number two, when this thing with Benoit happened and people started attacking the business that I grew up loving and pouring out my blood, sweat, and tears for, I felt like somebody with credibility had to come back to defend it. And so Chris Jericho intentionally booked himself on a couple of select talk shows so that he could bring credibility to the other side of this issue and to try to help people understand that this isn't just some rampant cancerous epidemic that's just eating the business alive.
Well,
because some of these people that had been run out of the business were trying to make the American public believe that. And the reason why, and I have to believe this, is because whoever show they were on was probably paying them to say that shit.
It made it even worse, like I said, with the Mark Mero situation, to bring that list of wrestlers that have died and on there, and like Stevie J just mentioned in the chat room, Earthquake died of cancer, and this list was supposed to be of wrestlers that died off drugs, and it was just annoying and just weird. And then to make matters worse, you got all these people calling from under a rock. You had Deborah Marshall, the ex-wife of Steve McMichael and Stone Cold Steve Austin on Hannity and Combs, talk about how she was abused. And then you got, Ultimate Warrior on Nancy Grace and Hannity and Combs and just tearing the industry apart limb by limb and, blaming everything that's went wrong in his life on the industry. And then you had the guys like Kevin Nash, Bill DeMott, Chris Jericho, and, a couple of guys trying to defend the integrity of the sport while they're still being teared down themselves. And then it just got worse each day, because I remember one day I turned on, I think it was Nancy Grace, and they had the ex-wife of one of the guys out of PG-13 on there talking about his drug abuse. And I'm just like, are we really going this far to find somebody's ex-wife of a guy that did? Are we really going this far? This is just ridiculous. Like, I even say it like this. If the fact Chris Benoit was not a wrestler, they would not have covered this as much as they had done. But the fact that he was a wrestler and it was their chance to somehow fuck with the wrestling business and blame it on steroids, that's why it got so much coverage.
Well, and now I will say this much, okay? In all fairness, it was easy to blame it on steroids when the cops went into Benoit's house and found ass loads of steroids.
Yeah.
I mean ass loads of every kind of steroid you can think of. The fucker was juicing. I mean, I'm just going to say it how it was.
Man.
There is no doubt about it. I mean, he was juicing like there was no tomorrow. Okay? Now, I will say this. I started watching Chris Benoit wrestle sometime around 1995. And I remember thinking way back then, okay? I remember thinking way back then, is it smart for a guy to be using a flying headbutt as a finishing maneuver?
No.
Because to make that believable, you've got to really be banging your head against that guy.
Especially if you're not being protected, really.
And and the fact is and Stevie J actually said it in the chat room just now. Chris Benoit's steroid level in the post-mortem autopsy was like fucking ridiculous.
Oh, I don't doubt that he wasn't doing them.
But the second thing about it is he did have severe brain damage also, probably from all the concussions he'd suffered. And again, this is a guy whose finishing maneuver was a flying headbutt.
Yeah, and, we was talking about the whole concussions thing a couple of nights ago, and I remember when they did the autopsy on him, and they were saying that his brain was so battered and beat up that it was operating like a 85-year-old man with Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And they were even saying they don't understand how he managed to do things with traveling and everything.
And I'm going to give Stevie J the quote of the night here. Brain damage plus steroid abuse equals big time chance he went batshit.
Well, also, he wasn't taking care of his concussions either.
No, he had severe brain damage. He was just one big walking fucking steroid. No doubt about it. And he did, in fact, go batshit. Those three facts are incontrovertible. Okay? So, because we people who aren't wrestling fans but had heard about the thing, because how could you not, okay? I don't think you could turn on the Weather Channel and not hear about Chris Benoit back in 2007, all right? So, friends of mine who don't care were asking me, so what was it? Was it steroids? It was roid rage, wasn't it? And then somebody else would say, well, did he have brain damage from all the wrestling and all this? And the answer to both of those questions is yes. Mm-hmm. It was probably a combination of the two, plus the fact, and Stevie J actually pointed this out earlier, you're on a roll tonight, brother. Everybody who ever knew Chris Benoit knew that he had kind of a dark personality anyway, that he was kind of a out there cat, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he probably had poor emotional controls anyway. I mean, it was probably just the perfect storm of several different factors that created this. And what we have to look at now is, well, okay, so we've identified some of what the problem probably was, and we've talked about how we felt about what went down at the time. But let's talk about some of the results that we've noticed as since then. I can give you one right off the bat. Randy Orton is currently suspended 60 days for a wellness violation. And it probably wasn't even steroids. In fact, he hinted today on Twitter that it might have been him smoking weed. He had the balls to actually hint at that himself today on Twitter.
And he's been busted for that before.
Yeah, I mean, Randy Orton's probably a pothead. I mean, and he has no problems with teasing that information on Twitter himself, so I'll just go ahead and say it here, okay?
Mm-hmm.
We all know Rob Van Dam's a proud, loud, and self-avowed pothead, okay? We know the Hardys have had their struggles with drugs. I mean, Rey Mysterio's been suspended a couple of times for wellness violations now. Anybody seen Evan Bourne lately? And from what I understand, that was synthetic marijuana, okay? So one of the things that we can thank Chris Benoit for now is a very tough wellness policy that does not discriminate between big stars and little ones. I mean, for every Evan Bourne that gets sent home, we've also got a Randy Orton sitting at the house right now. You know?
Well, the thing with the wellness situation is, there's always been a wellness policy in the WWE, and, back in WCW, they had it for a while, but they never made it public knowledge. And after this whole Benoit situation, now when somebody gets busted, it's public knowledge. And what really made this actually become public knowledge is when that whole big bust for Signature Pharmacy came about right at the catalyst of the Benoit situation, where you got guys like, Chavo Guerrero, Randy Orton, William Regal, Edge, Funaki, Rey Mysterio, Gregory Helms, John Morrison, Charlie Haas, Chris Masters, Ken Kennedy, Umaga, all of them getting caught.
Mm-hmm.
And there was so many more guys like Kurt Angle, Booker T was still in WWE around that time. So many guys, it was about 14 guys that got caught around this situation, and then it was like right when that happened, the whole Benoit situation was right there, and that got blown up in the news too. About how could WWE employ these guys? They're all on drugs and everything, and I think that's what made it more so public knowledge, because when they threw that up on the news, I remember the night they threw it up on the news, I was just like, well, Vince is not going to have no choice but to make this public knowledge. Now, it doesn't matter who it is. I mean, we've had situations where referees been suspended for getting caught with something, and they make it public knowledge. They throw it right up on their website and throw it up on their corporate website. And, I mean, it's really nobody's business in the public of who's got caught, but since this whole Benoit situation, and the media is so easily to get in your business, and then you got Linda McMahon running for Senate and stuff, you've got to make it public knowledge, or somebody's going to go around and dig up dirt on these guys.
Well, and that's the thing, and it was pointed out in the chat room that, and I think it was Angel Canada that pointed it out, that there was a steroid scandal in the early to mid '90s in WWE. Mm-hmm. Okay, Hulk Hogan was embroiled in that whole thing, and anybody who tries to tell me that Hulk Hogan never used steroids is a fucking liar. Okay, I mean, don't even try that one with me. All right. So WWE, at least since then, has always had a wellness policy of sorts.
Yeah.
The issue has always been to what degree was it enforced and to what degree was it made public. Ever since the Benoit thing, anytime somebody gets suspended, it goes right on their corporate website. Now, part of that's because they're a publicly traded company now, and, stockholders have a right to know when some of their investment's sitting at home for 30 or 60 days, okay? But a lot of that is also because of this Benoit shit. They have to show the American public and the media that anytime somebody gets busted for drugs, they're immediately taking action. Because that was one of the things that Vince McMahon got roasted for in the aftermath of the whole Benoit thing, was what could you have done to prevent this? Well, the truth is there's probably nothing he could have done. Okay? But at least in terms of the media, they've got to sell copy, and they're going to try to sensationalize it to do that. And that was what they went for. All right? Now, as it turns out, yes, we have this wellness policy now that is strictly enforced and very publicly reported. to the tune of 9-time world champion Randy Orton sitting at home right now. 2 or 3-time world champion Rey Mysterio sitting at home right now. I mean, they're not afraid to fire suspend the big guys as well as the little ones for this thing now. That's how serious they've become about enforcing their wellness policy. You know, Jeff Hardy was a world champion and wound up getting run out of the company because of his demons. I mean, the thing is, though, is that's actually, in my opinion, one of the positive developments that came out of the whole Benoit thing was the fact that the public now knows how serious the WWE is about policing the drug problem in this business. Okay? One of the other positive things that's come from it is they have a more strict concussion testing and rest policy now. Mm-hmm. I'll give you a very recent example. Alberto Del Rio got pulled out of a world title match at the last pay-per-view because he had a concussion. And they were not going to let him compete with that concussion. And you can thank Chris Benoit for that.
Yeah.
Because do you think 20 or 30 years ago guys sat at home for 3 weeks with a concussion? Hell no.
No.
I mean,
it's a good thing.
Back in the 80s, you could break your back and be right back out there the next night.
Yeah, because, back then, many of the guys from the 80s stuff, they admitted they didn't care, or they didn't get paid and they was working hard for the money. But now with this whole situation of, everybody's concerned about concussions, and it's not just in wrestling, it's starting to be in all sports now. It's starting to be in NFL, baseball, basketball, hockey, any type of sport. Everybody's more so concerned about concussions where, maybe 5 years ago, no one really gave a damn if you got hit, 20 times during a game on the field. You get up, you're all right. But now, you got these athletes being more careful and going to the doctor more, being checked out more, and you're even having some situations of where, teams won't draft the guy if they know he's had a bad concussion situation over the years. And I think it's a good thing because you've got too many of these situations going on. Recently just had that one guy, what was his name? The NFL player that just committed suicide, apparently. I can't remember. Junior Seau or something like that?
Seau, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, apparently he's had this whole situation just like Chris Benoit. He had so many concussions, no one checked him, and it eventually just fucked with his brain so bad to the point where he just snapped. And you've got to watch these situations because, just because you had a concussion one week and you get up and you're fine, and you get another one, you get up, you're fine, you get another one, you get up, you're fine. You don't know what that's doing to your body. Mm-hmm. That can, you can break anything. It can do something to your brain, it can shift your mind process, anything. That's why it's so important, and I'm glad that WWE has gotten behind this situation of where you got these guys that are taking these high bumps in the ring, getting hit in the head with a chair, and whether it's protected or not. You got to have this because we don't want any more of these situations going on.
Well, and the thing is, I mean, I'm sure Alberto Del Rio didn't want to sit at home and give his spot up to Dolph Ziggler. And now he may have permanently given his spot up to Dolph Ziggler. But the thing is, they can't take that chance. And it's not even just for, we don't want another Benoit situation. They have to protect their investment, too. They've got a lot of money tied up in these wrestlers.
Yeah.
I mean, they've paid Alberto Del Rio a shitload of money over the last several years, and the guy keeps getting injured. They can't afford to send guys out there with scrambled brains to wrestle for a couple of reasons. One being, if they get hurt worse, they're going to lose them. Okay, and then the other thing is somebody out there with scrambled brains is going to fuck up and hurt somebody else. I mean, they have to protect not just the integrity of the business; they also have to protect the people in the business. So I think it's a great thing that this wellness policy that WWE has is suddenly all transparent, and they don't mind telling you who's suspended and pretty much why. The other thing I love about the wellness policy is they don't just test for steroids. I mean, Evan Bourne got suspended for smoking synthetic marijuana. They're not discriminating between steroids and weed, and I'm not going to get into an argument about whether marijuana should be legalized. Let's don't even bring that into the conversation. But the fact of the matter is they're testing for everything. You know, obviously some guys have prescription painkillers for some of the shit that they put themselves through. And the thing is as long as you're prescribed those medications, whatever. It's these guys running around popping pills that they weren't prescribed. That's a problem.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I love the fact that WWE is taking more of a concerted interest in protecting the business and the people inside of it, okay? One of the other changes that came out of this is that now any former WWE employee who is struggling with drugs now can go to rehab on Vince McMahon's dime.
Yep.
He will pay to put former superstars through drug rehab. Scott Hall, I think, has probably sent him a bill 3 or 4 times now. And it still isn't taking, but the fact that WWE is not only trying to protect the stars that are in the business today, but they're actually offering their services to people who are no longer in the business, no longer in that company, and offering to send them to rehab is one of the things that we can thank this whole Chris Benoit tragedy for.
Yeah.
So, one of the other things, you know, we talk about what WWE is doing to proactively attack the problem of concussions and drug use and all that within the business. Of course, one of the other things that had to change as a result of this whole Benoit thing was the content. And it actually started the very night Vince McMahon made that announcement. If you'll remember, the week before that, McMahon had been, quote, blown up in a limousine.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like the whole who shot JR of the WWE. You know, it was who blew up Vince in the limousine. And when Vince came out there that night, he killed that angle right there. He said tonight was supposed to be about, you know, figuring out who was responsible for the demise of my character, Mr. McMahon. That angle was gone. It was over. And from that day forward, we started trending heavily towards more PG ratings. I'm talking, you know, DX had to tone their shit way down. Their you know, potty humor and their dick jokes and all that stuff. Blood disappeared from matches for the most part. You know, they started banning moves like Randy Orton's head punt and, you know,
pile driver.
Yeah, the pile driver is gone now except for the tombstone, and only 2 people are allowed to do that, and that's Kane and the Undertaker.
Yeah.
And whoever they happen to be, and Triple H apparently. So they started banning all these different moves that led to concussions. I don't see anybody doing a flying headbutt anymore.
No. And, you know, not only that's changed is, we've all been saying it for the past couple of years. Right after that, it wasn't even a day later, you know, WWE pretty much put out a statement saying that they are no longer associating themselves with anything Chris Benoit, his career, championship titles, moves, anything. He will no longer be mentioned on anything. They even went as far as to go back to their old DVD releases of videos and stuff he's been involved on and, you know, went over that and blanked out his name when announcers were talking about him. You didn't hear his name or anything. And, I mean, they really just wrote this guy off. And I remember the next night on ECW when Vince McMahon came out and said, you know, had that promo at the top saying, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Last night on Monday Night Raw, the WWE presented a special tribute show recognizing the career of Chris Benoit. However, now some 26 hours later, the facts of his horrific tragedy are now apparent. Therefore, other than my comments, there will be no mention of Mr. Benoit's name tonight. On the contrary, tonight's show will be dedicated to everyone who has been affected by this terrible incident. This evening marks the first step of the healing process. Tonight, WWE performers will do what they do better than anyone else, and that's entertain you."
Exactly. And not only that, but Benoit's name has not been mentioned on WWE television since that night.
Yeah, that's what he said that. And it was like right after that, I mean, I remember going to the website, and you would have thought Chris Benoit never existed.
Mm-hmm. Now,
I mean, his name is off everything.
He is still in the title history because you can't take a name out of the title history and explain how it went from one guy over this gap to the next guy. So I think if you look up the title history, you'll still see his name in there, but that's the only place.
Yeah, now it's there. But then they really disassociated themselves with him, even to going as far as in the video games, they took out his moves.
Mm-hmm.
And then, just now a couple of years, for the past 2 years, they just put him back in there. And, they put him in their WWE encyclopedia, mentioning his championship wins and stuff like that. But up until, a couple of years ago, WWE and Chris Benoit could not be used in the same sentence.
Right.
And to make matters worse, it wasn't just them that was doing it. It seemed like the whole entire industry was doing it their damn selves.
Yeah.
You had people didn't want nothing to mention him, didn't want to see nobody do his moves. I remember watching this one match, somebody used his crossface submission and the crowd just booed. And, it was just so bad to the point no one wanted to associate with this guy. And it's sad to think about, all the things he's done in this business and, how many people he's inspired. And now people are scared to say that he inspired them or they were a fan of his, or because they'll get, chastised by everybody else of how can you be a fan of this horrible man, of what he did to his family.
Well, and the thing is the debate still rages on today about whether he should be omitted from, DVDs and being mentioned on television and whether we should basically obliterate his entire career. Okay. So, but the fact of the matter is a good chunk of WWE history has been erased because of this thing. There are some of the most fantastic wrestling matches I have ever seen. And listen, we talk about sports entertainment, we talk about storylines, we talk about booking, we talk about character and character development, we talk about gimmicks, we talk about, all this shit. But at the core of all of this, since I'm 8 years old, I've always been a fan of the wrestling. CM Punk talks about, I'm not a superstar, I'm a professional wrestler. I'm not a sports entertainment fan. I've always been a fan of pro wrestling. The actual art and craft of wrestling on the mat, okay? And some of the most fantastic matches I've ever seen wrestled involved Chris Benoit. And they are now wiped out. There are even DVDs running around out there where clearly he was in the match, but he's blurred out, so you can't even tell who it was. And that is just asinine to me. To me, and listen, again, I'm caught firmly in the middle of, should I forgive Chris Benoit for what he did? Should I separate the man from the wrestler? Or should I just be all fuck Chris Benoit and move on with my life? Okay? I am stuck firmly in the middle on that, and I haven't moved 3 inches off the center of that argument in the last 5 years. I don't know which way to go with this thing, even 5 years later. Okay? But you can't erase history. All right?
No.
That's like finding out that Benjamin Franklin was a heavy drinking womanizer, which, by the way, he was. Okay?
Yeah.
Does that eliminate the fact that he invented the bifocals and discovered how to harness electricity with a kite and a key, invented the first public library, was the first postmaster general of the United States, was in the Constitutional Convention, invented the first fire truck, all this shit he did. Does the fact that he was a womanizing hard drinker erase what he did?
No.
No, it does not.
But that's the thing with Chris Benoit is, I try to remember him for, the great matches, everything he's done, even the night when he first won his first World Heavyweight Championship. And, I try to remember those things of, the best of, I think it was 5 or 7 series with Booker T. And I try to remember those things, but when you have something like this that was so big, that was not only on the TV. I mean, people that had nothing to do with wrestling or gave a damn about wrestling was covering this situation. And then you get on the internet, and it's all over the place on the internet. This thing was so big that you could not escape it. And so that overshadows the fact that he was this great wrestler, this great in-ring technician, that half these guys that are in Ring of Honor over in Japan, in the WWE currently, or still on the indies looked up to and was inspired by him. A lot of these guys still do his moves because they were inspired by him, but it's just that one thing he did overshadows everything good he did.
Yes,
and that's the thing that sucks.
And again, I'm stuck in the middle on the thing. I also understand fully the other side of the argument. He killed his wife, he killed his son, he killed himself in a cowardly act of making sure he didn't have to pay for those crimes. I understand that. I get the other side of the argument, and I was righteously indignant and still am. Again, I'm a father to 2 small children, okay? So I understand the righteous anger that people feel about what he did. I get that. But part of the problem I have with wiping out his existence from WWE history in terms of the matches he put on and the importance that he had on the business itself is you're cheating the people he wrestled by doing that.
Yeah.
Now you're punishing Triple H and Shawn Michaels. Now you're punishing Bret Hart. You're punishing Dean Malenko. You're punishing Ric Flair, because, hello, Chris Benoit was a 4 horseman at one point. I mean, you're punishing all the people that had nothing to do with what he did, okay, by wiping him out. The fact is there's got to be some happy medium where you can still showcase the shit he did and the matches, the fantastic matches he had for the sake of at least the other person that was involved in the match, if nothing else. You're cheating Chris Jericho, okay? But there has to be a way to still showcase the matches he put on while putting them in the context of, but. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In other words, let's don't forget what he did. Let's don't let go of how wrong that was and how tragic it was. But there's got to be some happy medium between that and just completely erasing him from all existence. The thing is to me, and this is something we have to understand, okay? And we say this week after week. The business of business is business, all right? Yeah. The WWE did not obliterate Chris Benoit from all of their, DVD covers and from their encyclopedia and stop mentioning him ever again on television. They didn't do all that to punish Chris Benoit. They didn't do all that because of what he did. They did all that because the media shit on them for what he did. And the WWE made a business decision to completely disavow themselves from Chris Benoit altogether, to show the media, to show the general public that they weren't going to put up with that shit, that they don't endorse what he did, they don't support what he did, they're not going to excuse what he did. It was a business decision. If Vince McMahon could have figured out a way to keep making all the money he was making prior to 2007 and still keep Chris Benoit as a prominent member, alumni or whatever, if you will, he would have done that. I really believe that it was a business decision for the most part. I do. Yeah. Because nothing Vince McMahon's done in the last 30 years convinces me that he's an overly religious or moral man in terms of, you know what I mean? I mean, the guy, I'm not saying he's an immoral man, and I'm not saying he's a shitbag or anything. But what I am saying is that Vince has no problem with pushing the envelope of appropriateness, okay? I honestly believe that if he could have kept making money and not worried about the media, he wouldn't have done what he did with Benoit. I believe it was a business decision on his part. I believe that was what he did because he felt like his company's survival depended on it. Because I'm going to tell you, in the aftermath of that whole Benoit thing for the latter part of 2007, it was touch and go as to how damaging this was going to be to the business. Congress was threatening to get involved and, in fact, did at one point. Law enforcement was still sniffing around. Then you had Benoit's doctor got hauled in and had a list of wrestlers that were on for human growth hormone and steroids and all this other shit. We had no idea how far and how deep this was going to strike into the heart of the business back then. And that's why 2 days after this happened, Vince McMahon was on ECW going, all fuck Benoit. We're never speaking about him again. And that was before he even had a chance to assess what the damage was going to be. But that was a survival move on his part, I believe.
Yeah, it just got, they even had situation of his doctor that was prescribing him all this stuff, Dr. Philip Aston III. He got brought into the situation where they were trying to pin up charges against him, and, they went back and found out that he was prescribing stuff to other guys in WWE and some that were no longer with the company, and it just got really crazy. You know, I understand it's a business, you know, decision by WWE to say, okay, we're separating our ties with this guy, we're no longer associated and everything. But it's also kind of like, okay, you can do this to keep the money in your pocket and make sure nothing happens to you, but your fans still remember the guy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to, you know, they, you know, like I mentioned earlier, they went as far as to, you know, cut him out of DVDs and stuff. They had, you know, the WWE Classics, you know, situation. They went as far as to cut him and Nancy out of any of the WCW broadcasts. And, you know, you go back and look at it and you're like, no, I remember this. Benoit was involved in this. They had cut him out. Like, why would you do that to your fans?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we know it's bad. You've got to keep its decision for you to keep your business running, but don't do that to your fans. We all know he existed.
And
we can't change it.
And once again, I sit right in the middle of that issue, and I don't know which way to go with it, okay? Because on the one hand, I agree with you, all right? I feel like it's insulting our intelligence.
Yeah.
You know, that's pretending he never existed is insulting our intelligence, and it's cutting out some damn good wrestling matches and some important, you know, one of the reasons they'll never put out DVD box sets of all the different years of Raw from, you know, 93 until now is because a good portion of that will have to include Chris Benoit. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to follow the stream of consciousness from one year to the next because there's going to be whole storylines cut out. You know?
Yeah.
So how do you really do that? I mean, I don't know. You can't do the reason that the Four Horsemen had to start and end with, you know, Flair, Arn, Tully, and Barry Windham is because you couldn't go into the WCW years of the Four Horsemen because Benoit was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't back up to the early days of the Four Horsemen because Ole Anderson was one of them, and that shit ain't happening, okay?
Yeah.
So that's why Barry Windham got the nod as one of the Four Horsemen going into the Hall of Fame, even though, in my opinion, he wasn't even one of the more notable ones, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, it just, you know, they had to honor the Four Horsemen, and they had to pick a version that was relatively safe and not controversial, and that's the one they went with.
And they couldn't get Sting because Sting was with TNA.
Right.
And Lex Luger, they couldn't get him, so.
Technically, so was Flair at the time, but hey, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, Sting just won't put his face on WWE programming. That's the bottom line. That's a decision he made years ago. Okay. Yeah. But with this whole Benoit business, you know, the content has changed a lot since then. We are in the era of PG now. Now we're starting. Vince has kind of relaxed that just a little bit over the last year or so. You know, over the last year or so, we've gotten a little more edgy programming again. The Rock came back and he cut a classic promo using the word ass and, you know, bitch, and, you know, some of the things that used to get said during the Attitude Era that we haven't heard in a long time. So the Rock had some of the old school attitude. Every once in a while, Stone Cold comes out and, you know, swills a couple of beers and throws the cans in the crowd, which is not something they really endorse anymore. We saw blood in the Extreme Rules match between Cena and Lesnar. You know, there was some blading there going on that we haven't seen in years, really. Any blood we've seen lately was mostly accidental. In fact, that Extreme Rules match is the first time I saw intentional blading. I don't remember how long on WWE television. So,
yeah.
You know, we've gotten a watered down, almost sterile version of what we grew up on now. And everybody, and I'm not bringing this up to get back into it, but I think some of the complaint we have with John Cena now was part of the booking that took place in the aftermath of the Benoit thing. We needed a almost cartoonish baby face to stand up and be the face of the business after that happened. And Cena was the biggest star in the business at the time, so he got the nod. A lot of the booking that we see today is a direct result of this whole Benoit thing. It is. You know, everybody wants to talk about, oh, Linda's running for the Senate, so they're backing off of their edgy programming so that she can convince people that she's all about family values. And there may be some truth to that.
Yeah.
There may be. But I really attribute a lot of the PG programming we get today to the whole Benoit thing. And really the only thing I have to point to is the fact that the week before Benoit snapped and killed himself and his family, we had this edgy thing about somebody blew up Vince and we're going to figure out who it was. From that day forward, they dropped that and began distancing themselves, not just from Benoit, but from edgy programming. And they began doing more safe programming. And now we've got John Cena out there using words like fudging. I'm going to win the whole fudging thing, he said last night on Raw.
Yeah.
They used to use the word fuck on Raw and just bleep it out.
Yeah, now the business is just, like you said, it's just a totally different direction as opposed to what it was. And it was just seemed like it happened overnight. One minute it's this way, the next thing, because this big situation happened, now we got to be careful with everything. And now it's all changed. Everything's PG, we can't do this, we can't do that. It was just like, wow, did all this happen because of this one thing? And, I attribute that to being the main source of why all of this happened. A lot of things happen with, the Signature Pharmacy bust, with all those guys getting busted, and then the Benoit situation, and then, so many things happened that WWE said, okay, we have got to go back to being PG to keep our asses safe. Because you remember years ago when they had that whole situation of the steroids trial, what happened to WWE programming? They went super PG.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everything was, cartoony and bright. Yeah. It was in the 80s, but it just got 10 times worse.
Well, and that's the point I'm trying to make. And Stevie J says that WWE is not wholly PG just because of Benoit. It's part of the reason. And he points out that they have video game marketing deals and toy merch marketing deals that force them towards a more PG thing. And the only reason I disagree with that statement is because I distinctly remember there being video games and toys being marketed back in the late 90s. I remember The Rock doing Sega commercials for the SmackDown game that came out, okay? And all the action figures and all I myself had a Goldberg action figure back in the late 90s. So that's not the part of the business that's changed, okay? We were marketing video games and they were probably selling more video games and action figures back in the late 90s than they are right now. Nobody would argue that wrestling's more popular today than it was then. But the thing that's changed is and it's not all Benoit, I agree with that. Some of it also had to do with Eddie Guerrero dying 2 years before that. And then the list of wrestlers that died right after Benoit did. We lost a lot of people in a very small amount of time between, say, 2005 and 2009. A lot of people. And there were a lot of questions being asked about the business itself. And that's when Vince made a conscious decision that he was going to wind his business back to the 80s, so to speak, and start marketing to kids again. Hell, I remember in the 80s, Hulk Hogan was the superhero. They had a cartoon out. I mean, Hulk Hogan was on the Jerry Lewis telethon. They made a conscious effort to go after kids. Well, guess what I was in the 80s? I was a kid.
Yeah.
That's when I started watching wrestling. It hooked me in. About the time I got to college, I wasn't in the mood for cartoons anymore. I wanted bad guys beating the shit out of each other. And that's why we got more edgy program in the late 90s. It cycles through. Well, now all the people that were in college in the mid to late 90s that wanted edgy programming are now parents of small children. And guess what I don't want my kid watching? The shit I enjoyed when I was in college. So now we're cycling the business back around to pick the kids up again. In fact, John Cena even said it last night. He used the term fudging last night, and Jericho goes, what are you, 9? And Cena said, no, but most of our audience is. And he's right. Vince made a conscious decision to take the business back to a place where parents would feel comfortable and proud with bringing their children to the arena to see it. That's why you don't get a lot of blood. You don't get a lot of cussing. You don't get a lot of dick jokes anymore. You don't see Big Dick Johnson out there in his banana hammock shaking his blubber.
No, dear God, no.
You don't get that shit anymore. DX, even when they come out, they just do sophomore toilet humor at best, but they stay away from the sex stuff anymore. Triple H very rarely pulls out the crotch chop anymore, and he only does it every once in a great while, and usually pointed at The Undertaker right before WrestleMania.
Yeah.
They've mostly, ever since the Benoit thing, ever since the media started really, really scrutinizing the business, there was a conscious decision made that we're going to start watering this product down so that we don't take a lot of the shit that we've been taking. And I'm sure some of that pressure probably came from the stockholders. Probably came from that board of directors that really exists somewhere in the, in the hallways of WWE. I mean, it is a publicly traded company. There is a board of directors that has a vested interest in making sure that thing turns a profit. And if the media has succeeded in bringing down the business like they wanted to, what would we have now? We would be depending on Dixie Carter every week for our wrestling entertainment. Depending on her.
That's one thing I'm trying to think of. With this whole situation at Benoit, didn't TNA start making their wellness policy public also? Because I'm not sure.
There was some discussion in the chat room earlier about that. I believe TNA has a drug policy, but the feeling in the chat room earlier was that it's not nearly as transparent as WWE's is.
Yeah.
They do have a drug test. I mean, shit, with Jeff Hardy on their payroll, they damn well better have one.
Well,
I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I just don't remember them ever saying anything about a wellness policy.
Well, and Rob Van Dam was on their payroll for a while, and I think he may even still be.
Yeah.
They damn well better have some kind of drug testing policy.
Yeah.
I mean,
you had to.
Yeah, so I just want to, and that's actually a good point you've just made, is one of the, some of the sort of third and fourth order of effects of all this thing is the Benoit tragedy didn't just affect WWE, it affected the whole industry.
Yeah. Like in Ring of Honor, they had this thing of where they had the guys checked for concussions and everything prior to events.
Right.
I mean, they do it like religiously. They check you for everything. And, they also had this thing of they don't want certain moves used there too, like the pile driver, because of, whole situation of concussions, which is a good thing, because a lot of people don't really look at Ring of Honor as a big promotion. They just look at it as another independent promotion on the indies trying to make it. But it's a good thing that this promotion that's out there on the independents is starting to do this, because that's also setting a standard for the rest of these promotions that have these guys out there that are just dying just to get in the ring and will take a chair shot to the head unprotected just to make that $20. And you've got to have somebody that's showing them, look, you can still have good matches, you still can put on good content and still be noticed without going to take the risk. Get yourselves checked, and you got, all these guys dying out here, especially on the independents lately, dying off of drugs or, situations that happen in the ring, and you need to be checked. I don't care what it is. I don't care if you got up and you felt fine after the match. You need to be checked, because you don't know what happened. Anything can happen to you. You take one big bump, you can break your neck. As simple as that, and then your career's done. And no one wants to seem to really wake up and realize that, yes, it's scripted, but you're still going out there and putting your body on the line. And if you don't have no insurance, you ain't got no money to take care of yourself, especially when you get injured, then you're fucked. And your so-called wrestling career is done.
Right. So that's the major effect that this whole Benoit thing has had. We have, let's call it what it is. We have a much more sterile product now. It's not as entertaining as it used to be.
No.
And even 5 years later, Vince is afraid to let it go back to the edgy shit that existed before that, because when's the next time a major we're going to lose one, whether it's the Eddie way or the Benoit way? You never know. So every time a major star in the business dies, they take a little bit of the business with them, and that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
It took a lot of wind out of my sails when he died, and he didn't, I guess you can argue that his enlarged heart had something to do with years of drug use. I don't know. I never did catch the whole story, and I frankly didn't even care. All I was concerned with Eddie Guerrero was making sure that the immediate cause of death was not some shenanigans on his part.
Well,
And when I was
the enlarged
satisfied,
heart came from that.
right, but when I was satisfied that the immediate cause of death was not something he had done in the immediate sense to himself, like
Yeah.
he doing drugs at that time or drank himself to death or something like that. When I was satisfied that the death itself was on the up and up, I let it go, and I didn't bother digging back into his past to see what may have ultimately caused it. Didn't care.
Yeah.
Okay. The Benoit thing, I immediately gave him the benefit of the doubt and then had to take it back.
Yeah.
So we've been burned so much that now when we hear a major star getting in trouble, we're like, how fucking stupid can they be? You know?
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and point out a couple of names. How fucking stupid is Randy Orton right now?
You know,
how stupid is Rey Mysterio right now? I don't even care about Evan Bourne, so I'm not even going to go into that one. But those two guys are multiple-time world champions. They fucking know better than this. How stupid are they?
Well, the thing is, what Randy Orton is, when I was going back and doing research on this whole Benoit situation, and, you know, reading some things, and a lot of people don't realize this is not Randy Orton's first time being caught. You know, when I went back and did some research, this is probably around his fourth time, or close to it, because he was caught in 2006 twice. And then he got caught around that big bust in 2007, and he got to skip it because he had just already served, you know, his suspension for the last two. And then he gets caught again and again. And it's just like, you know, when I was just reading this stuff, I'm like, I lost count. Because I'm thinking, like, wait, how many times is he being caught? You know, I love Randy Orton to death, but how many, I don't give a damn what it is. How many times are you going to get caught until somebody says, you know what, this is getting ridiculous. How come this guy can get 2 strikes and you guys fire him? Or this guy gets 1 strike and you get rid of him? Or this guy gets 3 strikes and you get rid of him? But this guy's been here, how many times been caught, how many times, and no one has said anything? You know, that's going to kind of separate the locker room of making them think, oh, because he's the big star in the company, it's nothing to worry about. He still has his job, and right now there's speculations that people think that his job might be up in the air, which I doubt. You know, I doubt they will let Randy Orton go, because that guy brings so much fucking money into their company. You know, but it just mind boggles me with him, and especially Rey Mysterio and a couple other guys that keep getting caught with the situation. Mm-hmm. How many times do you have to get caught until you realize, you know what, my job is on the line? How many times are you going to do this? You know, Rey Mysterio, he just got back in the ring, and next thing you know, he's out, and it's just like, how many times are we going to go through this? Yeah. It just doesn't make any sense. And the thing gets me is everybody, you know, Jeff Hardy. We all know Jeff Hardy had drug issues. You know, he had his problems in the past. Now he's finally got on the right track. Everybody is soon to point the finger at Jeff Hardy of how come he's still working there? How does he still have a job and he's fucking up this week and that week? But you have these two dudes, every time you turn around, they're out or suspended for something, for failing wellness, and no one says anything. Mm-hmm. But they're soon ready to point the finger at a Jeff Hardy or Matt Hardy or some other guy like Scott Hall or somebody that has drug issue problems, but don't say anything about these guys getting caught left and right.
Right. And by the way, Angel Canada in the chat room also pointed out another person that I'd forgotten got pinched for wellness, R-Truth. Now, you know, R-Truth has always been right on the edge of good things. In fact, I thought for a while there that he was probably primed for not necessarily a title run, but at least a run in the title picture. And then he got pinched for his wellness violation, and that just completely derailed his shit. Guys have got to know better now, you know? who was it once that said that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it? And I think that's really the legacy of the Benoit thing. You know, Vince has learned a lot from that whole thing. That's why there's strict testing now for drugs or strict testing for concussions. They'll sit a guy out even if he's a major player in a major match at a major pay-per-view if they think he has a concussion. You see guys taking lots of time off to heal their injuries now. Some of that's probably because it takes time to heal injuries, but a lot of that is probably because Vince says, oh, you're hurt? Get the fuck out of here until you're better. Don't come back until you've rehabbed and come down off of whatever it is they're giving you to help you rehab. Don't come back. Because steroids sometimes are prescribed by doctors to help treat injuries, okay? That's why when guys get injuries, you see them disappear for a while. Probably some of it is so that they can cycle back down off the steroids before they come back. You know, you don't test a guy while he's injured because, of course, he's on drugs.
Yeah.
So, you know, guys used to play through the pain. I mean, when did Mick Foley ever take 8 months off for an injury?
Well, see, that's...
When did Ric Flair ever take a year off for injury? When did Hulk Hogan ever take a year off for injury? You never saw those guys doing that.
No.
But as a result, they're walking around in the bodies of 95-year-old men now because of it.
Yeah, they've damaged themselves along the way. And that's another thing, you know, another question that was brought up during this, you know, whole Benoit incident, especially on the media news, is, you know, if these guys are in such pain and they're getting banged up so much being on the road all year round, a lot of people don't realize, especially if you work in WWE, you're on the road all year, 24/7. You might get 2-3 days off, but mostly on those 2-3 days off, you have to go and do promotional work here and there. Then you have to pack your bags and get back on the road. Mm-hmm. The question that was brought up is, okay, if these guys are on the road this much and they're in pain and, you know, the agents, the officials, the boss of the company knows they're in pain, they're banged up, you know, they got to put ice packs on every body part. And if you know they're in this much pain, why not reduce the schedule?
Well,
you know, but
yeah, we've talked about that. Vince is not going to stop printing money.
No, that's the thing. If they were to reduce the schedule, it would ruin business in a sense, because WWE has been working on the same schedule since it's fucking existed. Even when Vince's father was in charge of the company, they've been working on this schedule since then. You know, constantly on the road. And a lot of people don't realize, I mean, decades and decades ago when wrestling really first started back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, the way these guys are traveling around now, you know, where they're on the road and they get 2-3 days off, back then, none of those guys, Lou Fez and them did not get a fucking day off. None of those guys did. They were constantly on the go. After they got done defending their title on one show, 2 hours later they had defended again at another show in another country. That's how they were on the road so much that, you know, they were broken. When they got to 60, 70 years old, you would see them, you'd be like, dang, how old is Lou Fez? Is he 95? And he'd be like, no, I'm 65. Because they were just so tired and broken. And there's no season off for wrestling. You know, it's not like the NFL and NBA where you get an off season where they can go rest and whatever. They're on the road constantly. So they're going to have to take something to alleviate the pain and relax them and get them ready for the next show. Yes, it might be dangerous, but what are they supposed to do?
Right. And I mean, I guess as we begin to wind this show down, you know, we talk about the legacy of Chris Benoit and the effect it's had on the business. We've certainly covered that in depth tonight. By the way, we'll do follow-ups on this and things like that as we go forward. Next week's show, we're going to go back to talking about what's going on in the WWE today. I don't want to keep looking back on this, but I do welcome feedback from our listeners, and you can reach me at AngryMark@gmail.com, and every once in a while we do get emails from some of our listeners. I do want to say this, and I'm not going to give attention to a certain emailer that we heard from this week, but I will say this. I have been forced this week to sort of rethink my policy about reading emails on our show. My policy up to this point is you send me an email, I'll read it on the show. I don't care what it says. I've had to go back on that, and I've had to rethink that policy. There are obviously certain limitations that I'm going to impose on what I'm willing to read and what I'm not on the show. And I will say this much without getting into any details. You sexually harass anybody who's on our show or involved in this network at all, you're not going to get read on the air, bottom line. And I think anybody could agree to that, okay? So as we move into the portion of the show where I encourage you to give me feedback, I'm also going to ask you to be a decent human being. And listen, we don't give a shit about cursing, obviously, because I just shit, okay? We don't give a care about you being an angry mark because, hello, this is AngryMarks.com, and we invite the anger. And if you want to be angry at us, that's fine, all right? That's fine. But personal attacks will not get any play on this show from now on, bottom line. You personally attack either one of us, you're not going to get read. That's it. Now, if you want to say that we're full of shit because of whatever, I'll read that. And if you want to tell me I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, I'll read that. You know? But personal insults, not going to get read on the air. That's all. Having said that, I would like to hear feedback from our listeners on tonight's show, the Benoit retrospective, and sort of the effects that we feel like it's had on the business. It's a very controversial issue, and there are a lot of emotions running in both directions on this topic. And I want to hear feedback in my email from all the listeners of the show. And I'm also talking to the marks that are in the chat room right now. Send me an email and let me know what you thought of tonight's show and what you think of the topics that we discussed. And I will read those on the air next week, provided they meet the criteria I just listed above.
Yeah.
Any last words, Ciara?
And if you send an email and you have an issue with anything that was said on the show and we offended you, please write that in the detail of the email. Don't call us dumbasses or morons or anything just to do it, and don't tell us why exactly you're mad and what offended you. Explain to us what really bothers you. That way we can discuss the whole situation. You know, I'm fine with fan feedback. I'm fine with it, you know. But I don't need the feedback of where you're not actually telling me what the problem is. You're more so just trying to disrespect people on the show that you listen to every week, and you're just trying to get over. If that's all your aim is, just to come and disrespect somebody because, woohoo, you disrespected somebody that does podcasts on AngryMarks.com, then please don't waste our time in typing up the email. People,
right.
Think before. I always tell people, common sense is not too common. Think before you act. Use your actions wisely.
Well, and the thing is, I don't mind being called a dumbass or a moron, but at least tell me why I'm one.
Yeah,
that's all I ask for. At least bring some content to your email. Don't just throw general attacks at me and then walk off.
You know, I don't care what people really say about me. I haven't cared for the past 2 years, so you can tell I've been here for 2 years. But don't tell me I'm a moron and I said something you didn't like, and you're not telling me what exactly I said that you didn't like. That's going to confuse me because I'm going to be like, well, what exactly did I say that offended you? Then you write me another email saying I offend you again, and you're not telling me the same thing. That's just stupid. I don't have time for that. If you cannot tell me the first time what your problem is, then you don't need to write a second one, okay?
What's the old quote from Roddy Piper? Don't bring rocks to a gunfight or something like that?
Just don't bring anything to the gunfight. Yeah. I mean, seriously, you're shooting with a bulletless gun. Just stop.
Right. Or no, Roddy Piper said something about don't throw rocks at a guy holding a machine gun or something like that. Well, I mean, I'm just going to roast your ass if that's all you can bring me anyway. So at least come with some content, come with some reasons, come with something to contribute to a conversation. And really, and I want to say this as we wind up tonight, this is what the feel of our whole show is. We don't sit and discuss a particular show and go result by result and move by move through it. We have other shows that do that. We have the Raw Reaction on Monday nights. We have the SmackDown Rundown on Saturdays, okay? That's what those shows are for, and I appreciate the people that do those shows. Yeah. Our show is topic-driven, and we just pick things that jump out at us throughout the week, and it crosses into those shows, certainly. But we tend to be more generally topic-driven. And what we bring to the table in this show is we bring rather strong opinions about what we feel strongly about.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's what we're about, and that's what we're going to do. And honestly, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, if that's a problem for you, don't listen.
I said that last week, and I said it since day one when this whole situation happened. You know, we're topic-driven. You know, we felt, you know, I've been saying it since, you know, Ring a Bell was around. we got so many shows that run SmackDown, Raw, and TNA, and, Ring of Honor. You got so many shows that run all those shows down top to bottom. You don't need another one. We can just pick topics out of what's going on currently in the news, what's going on in shows, or what's going on in general in the business, and we can discuss them. We wanted to be different. And I think there's nothing wrong with that because, you're going to want one of those shows around too where they're just pinpointing what's the big things going on as opposed to what's going on the entire show. And I'm going to say, like, right now, if anybody that listens to the show weekly, supports the show, if any of you have anything you want to talk about on the show, send out an email. Tell us something you want us to talk about, and we'll bring it up. If you have any questions you want answered, send that in. Mm-hmm. If you want to tell us how the show, you didn't like the show, what you liked about the show, send that in. Just tell us anything. Let us know what you guys are enjoying and what you're not enjoying and what you would like to hear on the show.
Right.
We don't need the negative feedback. I'm fine with negative feedback, but if it's crossing the line of where you're disrespecting Frank, Kev, the boss Stevie J, Nikolai, Jeff, myself,
Alex.
Seth Draken, Mike Poland, Alex Goff, any of the guys that work here and bust their asses, even if they do recaps, anybody that's here in this network, if it's going that far to where you're disrespecting any of us, then you're disrespecting me.
Yeah, and
because this is my family. Okay.
And it comes down to something that I think it was Nikolai said this: people want to be keyboard thugs.
I really thought the keyboard thugs died in like 2000, but apparently not.
But anyway, we've said enough about all that. Folks generally get where we're coming from, and anyway, that's probably enough about all that. But I do want to point out, and I don't know if Kev's back there or not. So, are you there, Kev? Kevin Fields, are you there? All right, I'll do the plugs. We've got the Raw Reaction on Monday nights. We have, of course, the AMP Tuesday nights. That's us. Glove Up or Shut Up on Wednesdays. We've got the Angry Marks podcast on Thursdays, and I believe there's a TNA show on Thursdays as well. Am I correct?
Impact Implosion. Okay,
we have the Impact Implosion on Thursdays, and of course we have the SmackDown Rundown on Saturday nights. Did I miss any shows?
Did you say SmackDown Rundown on Saturdays?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, so folks, basically I encourage you to go to AngryMarks.com, look at all the articles, all the news items, all the commentaries that we have. Big heaps of news every day. Stevie J works hard to get that out to you. So go and check that out to stay up on what's happening. And, of course, check out the podcast on the Angry Marks Podcast Network. In the meantime, we will return to regularly scheduled programming next week where we will bitch and gripe and moan and complain about all the things that we don't like. And we might even once in a while throw in something we did like. So, Ciara, again, thank you so much for helping me tackle a very tough subject tonight. And I want to thank our Marks out there for listening and for contributing in the chat room.